There's so much to say about tonight's speaker, who has asked us to keep it short. But I'll just say that as a war correspondent, Mitzi has visited Ukraine 3 times, has published over 100 articles, and is on Zoom almost every day with her contacts inside Kyiv. She first went to Ukraine as the guest of the police chief, responsible for documenting war crimes. Many of her interviews were conducted in bomb shelters, while the cities she was visiting were under active attack. She recently joined the board of Renew Democracy Initiative, created by the great Russian chess player and leading anti-Putin dissident, Garry Kasparov. She's involved with several Ukrainian organizations in the US, and she's working with Dennis Francis, president of the UN General Assembly. Her focus is on the human side of the war, rather than the battlefield movements, although she also has perspectives on Russia's strengths and weaknesses. She's won multiple awards for her work as an author, humanitarian, columnist, social justice activist, and on top of that, she's a library lover and understands the work that we do each day to build an informed electorate and empower folks with the knowledge to build happier, healthier, more empowered lives. Please help me thank Mitzi Perdue.
Well, first, Anne, my goodness, the research you did, and I think that's the nicest introduction I've ever had in my life, so thank you very much. Now, I had planned for you an opening, which I'm changing like right now in real time, because there's somebody in this audience who asked a question, and her name happens to be Kristen. She wanted to know how I happened to be invited to go to Ukraine. And I will give you that answer, and then I will continue. How I happened to be invited to go to Ukraine, I am a columnist by trade, and one of the organizations that I write for is Psychology Today. I had written a story for Psychology Today on human trafficking in a war-torn area, because for those of you who aren't familiar with human trafficking, the global cartels, it's a $40 billion a year industry, they hunt around for where the most vulnerable people will be, and that's war zones. And knowing that, I interviewed people about human trafficking in Ukraine. It was published in Psychology Today. And I kind of thought that would be the end of my connection with Ukraine, but that's not what happened. The head of police for the Kyiv region, and that's the size of Massachusetts, by the way, the head of police, his name is General Nebitov, he, by coincidence, had written his master's thesis on human trafficking. And somehow, my little article in Psychology Today, it had the word human trafficking in it, and it had the word Ukraine in it, and somebody put it on his desk, and I don't know how he did this, but he tracked me down. I was spending the summer in New Hampshire with my sister, and suddenly I'm in Dublin, New Hampshire, on the side of a mountain, and I get this Zoom invitation to talk with the chief of police of Ukraine, who, bless him, said that he liked my story, but he said, you barely scratched the surface. If you'll come to Kyiv, you can be our guest for 6 days, and you can see for yourself. Well, 10 days later, I fly to Warsaw, because they don't have any direct flights to Ukraine during a war. You know, the planes might be shot down. And then it's a 19-hour trip by train. So I end up in Kyiv. And in case you're curious, dear Kristen, about what it's like to be in a war zone, I check in at the Seven Mirrors Hotel, which was chosen for me because it's right next to the German embassy, and the assumption in Kyiv is that the Russians aren't going to bomb something right near. Did I say the German embassy? that it's pretty safe because Russia doesn't want an international incident bombing the German embassy, so this hotel that touches it is probably safe. I check in, and I get this little lecture as I'm checking in. They tell me, if there's an air raid, you've got roughly 5 minutes to get down like 8 stories into the basement. And we want you to have a go bag. The go bag is to have your documents and any medications and have it by the front door. And if you hear the air raid, your job is, don't change, don't even reach for a bathrobe. Just grab your go bag and, get down before bombs fall. And I thought that was just sort of really dramatic. It's not going to happen to me. It did that night. And so I spent my first night in Kyiv in a bomb shelter. Well, that's how I happened to be in Kyiv. Okay, but what I wanted to talk with you before I met Christian was about this. Can you see it in back? It's pretty small, and actually that's the point that it's small. Does anybody know what it is? How do you know? I mean, you're right. Okay, what we're looking at is what I think, and it's kind of the theme of my talk, it's one of the most evil things that I've ever come across, because this is, I'm going to put this down. Let me toss it to... Okay, what we're looking at is, it's called a butterfly mine. And what's evil about it is, it has no real military purpose. It is aimed at children. I happened to know about it because my first day in Kyiv, I was assigned a policewoman who's also a translator, and we're driving along to where I'd go the first appointment, and we passed some of the most beautiful playgrounds I've ever seen in my life. I mean, they look like Disneyland, Fairyland. The Ukrainian just really, was a very kid-friendly place, and no kids in any of the playgrounds we passed. And so I asked Irina, how come no kids? And at that point, she opened her cell phone and swiped through to show me a picture of things like this. And I'm showing you the summer version, but there's also the fall version, which is kind of orange and brown. It's meant to, if it falls on the ground and it's scattered around a playground, if there are any leaves or pine needles, just in a matter of hours, it's going to be covered. And the adult version of this will have 37 grams of explosives. The child one has 10 grams of explosives. And I asked her, why 10 grams? And she said, because the Russians have figured out, and we're now at the really evil part, they figured out that at 10 grams in one of these things, by the way, this is a model. It's what they use, where I bought it from a company that trains people in landmine disposal. So I'm not going to have something that would explode on everybody. But why 10 grams? She said, the Russians have figured out that they would genuinely rather have a child lose a foot, which at 10 grams the child will if it steps on it, or maybe the child sees it as a toy and picks it up, and the motion will make it explode, the child will lose a hand. Now, why do the Russians want that? They particularly want the children to be maimed but not killed, because if a child is maimed, that means there will be one parent who will be the caretaker, who will kind of be out of commission and not contributing either to the economy or to the war effort. And it will stretch if you need an amputation, the rehab, the medical resources that go for that, all of that means that those resources aren't going to help Ukraine fight the war. So what kind of civilization would deliberately scatter landmines in playgrounds or wherever else children congregate. And so Irina and I got to talking about that, and I learned more about landmines. What I learned was that the Russians, they so deliberately go after children. Like, I'm going to show you you'll see this more than once. But this is a regular iPhone, but what the Russians do, and until the Ukrainians caught on, they would take iPhones or smartphones, they would, probably dead ones that weren't working anymore, they would open them up and they would put inside plastique, which is an explosive, and they would rig them so that a child, in this case they would put them in the high schools, a kid says, "Oh, look, somebody left their cell phone," and they go to turn it on, they die. I heard from General Nebitov that it's just standard practice when the Russians were leaving an occupied area, say they've gotten kicked out, they will so deliberately do things like, you come home, you're so happy to be home, you've been in exile and your town's been liberated, you go back to your home, you open the garage door, boom, or the microwave or the washing machine. They just rig them with explosives so that you will be injured, probably not die, but you will be injured. And what military purpose does that have other than demoralization? And while we're on the subject of landmines, I remember, we're talking December of a year ago now, I was driving, since I've been there 3 times and I'm a guest of the police, and they give me a police escort. We're driving along quite rapidly, often 80 miles an hour, and I'm watching as a guest, I'm ready to be wrong, but I think we passed 10,000 acres of snow-covered farmland with these black spikes coming up to about maybe this height, and sunflower pods at the top of each of these black spikes. And my background's agriculture, and it's real clear that these are never going to be harvested. I mean, they're black, they're moldy, and I asked her, how come they didn't get harvested? And her answer was that the Russians have, at this point, and the information I'm giving you right now is a year old. She said the Russians deliberately target prime agricultural land. And I have since seen batteries, and probably 10 or 15 of what I'm about to describe. They're called zemlodillas. And these are things, they're the size of a Volkswagen bus, and they have maybe 50 rockets that can be fired from them. And the person operating the zemlodilya, he will have directions or the coordinates of the prime agricultural land. And each one of these 50 canisters that he will shoot off, and they can hit farmland 13 miles away, but we'll just spray them with landmines that are sufficient, like to blow up a tractor or kill the person. And I was talking with Irina, how about the day before yesterday, and we were talking about landmine clearance, and she was saying, the terrible thing is you're a farmer, you want to get into your land, you want to sow the land, you want to cultivate it. And she said, with 40% of the prime agricultural land of Ukraine right now being unfarmable, the urge of the farmer whose land, this is his livelihood, it might have been in his or her family for generations, they want to do something. And so they try to clear it themselves without the skills of knowing how to do it, and so many end up with their equipment blown up or them losing an arm. It's just, and again, what kind of civilization seeks out destroying the prime agricultural land? I mean, the evil of it. And when I say the zemlodillas, I bet there are hundreds of them, and Russia's so proud of this. And for landmine clearance, I mean, I got really interested in landmines just because of the sheer horror of it. Here's a statistic from the Halo Trust. The Halo Trust says that a rule of thumb is that for every day that a country is at war, it will take a month of landmine clearance, and by that schedule, Ukraine won't be landmine free until after 2060. And the Russians are just continuously pumping in landmines wherever they are. Utterly, utterly evil. Well, I want to move on now. By the way, I will have something more positive, but sticking with evil for a moment. For we in the West, I think it's hard even to process the idea that people go after children or agricultural land. I think we want to think that they're like us, that they're nice guys. Well, the people at Putin's level, I'm not sure there's any other word for it than evil. And they do things that we in the West, it's just foreign. In fact, a quick side note about the United States and landmines. Yeah, we use landmines also. But here's the circumstances under which we use them. We might use them like to protect a bridge. But we map where each one is so that when the conflict is over, we can go back and retrieve them. The Russians don't. The ones that are just sprayed by these zemlodillas, the only way to clear them is to find them. Well, to continue on, of things that just, for me, it's hard to process that we do these things. Since I was the guest of the Ukrainian police, and to my knowledge, I'm the only war correspondent who specializes in law enforcement. It's the Ukrainian police that document war crimes. So when I would be visiting I don't know if the name Irpin or Bucha, these were areas that were liberated. I'd be at the police station, and in these towns, a town might have a population of 4,000, 8,000, and the word spreads that there's an American correspondent who wants to write about it. The police station, there would be people lined up wanting to tell their story. And I have in my files almost 100 stories of people that I've interviewed. And I want to share one with you. And I'm kind of casting around in my mind which one to share, but let's go with Elena. Elena spent her life in Kherson, which looks like Kherson, but they pronounce it Kherson. While in Kherson, her job, she's 60 years old, and she was a bureaucrat in something like, I don't know, the DMV or some equivalent like that. She's not a high-level person, but when the Russians invaded, she got picked up for interrogation. And we in the West, when we think interrogation, we're probably thinking of a television show where there's a good cop and a bad cop and a bright light. It's not like that for her, or for any of the others that I've interviewed. Here's what interrogation was like for her. They said that they had been informed. Am I speaking loud enough? Okay, they told her that she'd been fingered as somebody who was part of the resistance, and they wanted her to name the people she was working with. And she said, but no, I'm just a bureaucrat. I just go to work every day. I wasn't part of any resistance. Well, you know what? They didn't like that answer. She watched as they took, imagine a liter bottle of soda, but this is a transparent liquid, and so she assumes it's water. And when they didn't like her answer, one of them, big strong guy, takes this liter bottle of water, and she's sitting down. Here's her neck, here's her head. This guy whacks her with the liter bottle of water. She told me that the world just went white, just pain like you can't imagine. And after that, they asked her again. And she told me that she told them, no, honest, I'm just a bureaucrat. I'm not working with any resistance. Whack! He does it again. She went through this like several times, and she wasn't going to go finger her friends. Since incredible pain wasn't getting her to talk, they tried the next step. They took the equivalent of duct tape and they covered her nostrils. And then they put a plastic bag over her head and they would squeeze around her neck. So now have any of you ever had the experience of suffocation? Maybe it's terrifying. I have, as I'll get into later, if somebody's good enough to ask me about an assassination attempt. But she said, it's absolute terror. Every cell in your body is screaming for air. And so she's just about to pass out, and she's in terror and as big a distress as you could get. They pull the plastic bag off and take the duct tape off, and she can breathe again. And they say, yeah, we'd really like you to tell us who you are working with. We want to know. Well, she still held out. She told me that, I'm not sure if I got the translation right, because it's almost hard to believe, but she said she held out 5 hours. I mean, I'm pretty sure I couldn't last that long. And then now we come to a part that's I'm going to tell you what I heard, and you judge. I mean, we can't judge, we don't know. She told me that after 5 hours, there was just nothing left of her. She snitched. She named people. You know, there's just anything you can do to make this stop. I can't stand it a second longer. And the part that's I'm unclear about is, as a journalist, I do something that not every journalist does, but I do it. I always send what I've written to the person I've interviewed, just to make sure I got the quotes right. And when she got back to me, she said, no, I didn't snitch. But I'm going to kind of guess that if it were me, I'd do anything to stop. But to continue with the story, she said, you know, now there's just hardly a shell of her left, because between pain and fear, they wanted her to confess on camera. So a guy comes up with a nice tripod and focuses in on her, and her job is to confess to all the terrible things that she had done. And she told me that, you know, here's the cameraman, and right out of view of the camera is a guy with a gun, and it's pointed right at her temple, and she's told, if you don't repeat what we've told you, we're going to kill you. Of course, she confessed. I mean, she had nothing left to resist with. But then when it came for her trial, they could show her looking at the camera and saying, yes, I was part of the resistance. Yes, I tried to. I mean, she confessed. That meant that she had a sentence of 20 years. But, you know, when somebody has a sentence 20 years here, we think of, you know, a jail that we're familiar with. But she told me that's not how it worked in her case or the people that she knew. Okay, so now she's a prisoner, and she's auctioned off to a human trafficker, a labor trafficker. His name was Batman, and he would have like a dozen prisoners who he would sell to the Russian invaders, and their job was to dig trenches, you know, for the Russians to dig in to defend that they had taken Kherson. And she told me, you know, she's in terrible shape right now. She has injuries that last to this day, but she knew perfectly well that if she's not digging the ditches, that she'll be shot on the spot, shot. But then another thing that left her with emotional scars was any Russian who wanted sex, she couldn't resist, or again she knew she'd be shot on the spot. She was, between being raped and doing physical labor. Well, after a couple of months, since this was in Kherson, and this is her native land, she knows the nooks and crannies of how to escape and where the trails are and everything. After a couple of months, she escaped and made it to freedom. But to this day, she has continuing problems, among them panic attacks. And in the question period, if anybody wants advice on panic attacks, I can tell what advice she got. But according to the World Health Organization, the WHO, there are 15 million people in Ukraine today who have mental health problems like anxiety attacks, panic attacks, sleeplessness, guilt, insomnia, endless nightmares, aggression. The problems in Ukraine right now, you read about the battles, but for the individuals, and again, since I interview war crime victims, the absolute cruelty, it's almost hard for Americans to process this. Well, okay, on my theme that the Russians do things differently from us, their penal system is different, their interrogation system is different, their willingness to use landmines on totally innocent people is different from us. But there's another one, and I'm holding up a cell phone. I'm assuming that most of you have smartphones of some sort. I have an opinion that this is more dangerous to us than atomic weapons. Well, why would I say that? How many of you have heard of a troll farm? Raise your hands, please. Okay, for those of you who raised your hands, raise them again. You've heard of it, but do you know what they do? Oh, yes, you would, Christian. She lived in Moscow for 6 years. So you know about this tactic. Here's what troll farms do. They consist of like somewhere between 2 people, and the largest that I know of employs 1,000 people. And what they do is they go into social media, and their purpose is to sow dissension. They want to get people riled up. They want to spread misinformation. And how can that be more dangerous to us than atomic bombs? Well, my personal view is, and I've heard many 4-star generals on YouTube say the same thing, Russia's likelihood of using atomic weapons, they're great for threatening us, but for actually doing it, they don't get any military advantage out of bombing Ukraine, out of nuking Ukraine. And it's been made really clear to the Russians, and both the US and the Chinese tell the Russians this: you cross that red line, we know where you are, Mr. Putin, and we're going to vaporize you. So, on a number of counts, I think that who knows what could happen, but I think the odds of Russia using nukes are really pretty slim, because they only have the real value as a threat, but actually using them, not so much. However, there's something that Russia can do with absolutely no consequences to them. It's something that, well, I'll give you an example. We delayed aid to Ukraine by half a year. And my personal opinion is that was one of the finer information warfare achievements of the troll farms. Here's how it works. A troll farm, and I'm going to describe it's one of the more famous ones. It's in St. Petersburg, and it employs 1,000 people. The 1,000 people, a lot of them are, well, I'd say A huge percentage of them are PhDs. These people have spent their lives studying America, looking at our newspapers, our radio, everything to find out where there's dissension, where there are fault lines. And it might be something like, it might be abortion. It might be, current ones, it's certainly about immigration. And what they'll do is, I'm going to give a very specific example. And it's one that I'm familiar with because there's a woman she's a caterist, and she works for my sister in New Hampshire. And she believes the following. She believes that Zelensky is persecuting Christians. She believes that he's as corrupt as a person can be, and that he's got all these, like palaces almost in Spain. She believes that any money sent to Ukraine goes right to the oligarchs. It doesn't help. And I have tried to tell her something that MIT has studied, and we're still on the subject of troll farms. She belongs to affinity groups on Facebook that are for, very specifically, the troll farms target every part of American society, but the one that I'm familiar with, or most familiar with, is the born-again Christian affinity groups on Facebook, to which Susie, I'm going to make up a last name, Susie Smith, belongs to. What Susie Smith doesn't know, but what the MIT Information Laboratory, what they say is that of the 20 largest affinity groups on Facebook, where people get their news, for people who share Susie's religious beliefs, of the 20 largest ones, 19 are controlled by Russia. And here's how they work, and why she believes them. Now, some of the affinity groups say they've been there for 15 years, but trolls have been there for 15 years also, and they're absolutely trained to have really delightful information of the sort where you'd say, gosh, I didn't know that, my friends ought to hear it. And they may have jokes, but sprinkled in among the things that people want to repeat will be pieces of disinformation. And I'm about to share with you what several people have told me about how a troll farm disinformation works. And I'll use Susie Smith as an example. There are three major elements for how disinformation works. The first part is there has to be a kernel of a truth in it. And the kernel of truth that Susie Smith absolutely believes, and it is true, that Zelensky has closed some Christian churches. It's true. The second part is of a successful disinformation campaign, it's got to have an element of truth. It has to be something that you kind of want to believe. And in these affinity groups that Susie belongs to, they present Russia as just a bulwark against Western degeneracy. And if you're born again, that's a very congenial message. And then the third part is the lie. There will be some lie, and in this case, it's going to be that Zelensky is persecuting Christians, and that that you should not have one penny go to Ukraine because it's all going to go to this horrible monster Zelensky who persecutes Christians. Now, here's where the troll farms come in. There could be as many as, on one Facebook page, there could be as many as 10, 50 trolls who all reinforce each other's messages. So, troll who's calling himself Ben Smith. Ben is really Ivan Ivanovsky from St. Petersburg, but he's pretending to be an American. Or maybe he's pretending to be Ukrainian in the case I'm about to describe. Now, Susan has watched him for 15 years. He's like a friend. He's the source of all these cool tips and good pieces of inside gossip and just things that really matter to her. And she's also checked him out. Do I believe this guy? So Ben Smith has actually been spending 15 years developing an online presence. He has a very impressive website. He has many followers on LinkedIn. He has a total online presence. With his online presence, he tells that he knows that Zelensky has imprisoned 10 people that he knows of personally for their religious beliefs. But then all the other trolls will chime in with things validating what Ben said, and they'll say things like, it's not 10, it's 1,200. My cousin works at the Lublovsk prison, and it's just populated with Christians who are being abused. And Susan is so inclined to believe this because people she's known and trust for years are telling her. And when I try to tell dear Susan about that these are that the affinity groups are controlled out of Russia, she just absolutely, totally rejects the concept. When I said that I thought that a cell phone could be more harmful to America's interests than atomic weapons, it's because look at the track record of what they're doing. There's a woman from the Institute for the Study of War who told me that the troll farms, what they're really good at is they get us riled up against each other, they sow dissension, but they also get us to act in ways that are against our self-interest. And delaying aid for Ukraine for half a year, boy, they had to be popping the champagne or the vodka or whatever, because, boy, was that a successful information operation. I want to make sure that I allow time for questions. Does anybody have any questions along the way? I'm very happy to question.
You mentioned human trafficking is such a big business. How do people make money in human trafficking?
Okay, here's how the cartels make money. Let me describe what I got to sites, because that's my first trip to Ukraine. If you're smuggling drugs, you put a certain amount of danger for getting them, and you sell it, and that's gone. On the other hand, you have a woman, and you can sell her 8 or 10 times a night, and her life expectancy is 7 years. You're making a fortune out of that woman. And how do the Russians get people on the? How do they capture them? And by the way, the numbers are just staggering. There are 8 million Ukrainian refugees. I've heard estimates that at the border, as many as 500,000 women have been just picked off. And here's how they do it. And I've seen this with my own eyes. To cross the border from Ukraine into Poland, I've done it 3 times, and it's usually like maybe a 5-hour wait. And you can see people at the border. I mean, there aren't many. What I'm about to describe, there might be, that I've seen, a group of 2 or 3. And you see them, the people that I'm about to describe, they're the spotters. And they're better dressed than anybody else, and they're not thin, and they don't look just at wit's end. The spotter will, and again, I've seen this, they look as if they're taking selfies of each other, but if you look at the angle of the cell phone, they're actually taking a photograph of somebody that they, as a spotter, believes will be particularly vulnerable. Maybe it's somebody who looks as if she's been walking for 5 days. She has what they call the 100-yard stare. She's just at wit's end. And maybe she has a little 8-year-old daughter that she's pulling along. Perfect. The spotter is then going to send that image to one of the traffickers on the other end, and the trafficker at the other end will come up to her and say, you look as if you could use a hot meal. And I've got a place for you to stay, and even better, it's been laid on my heart that I want to help you get a job. I will find employment for you, but the bus leaves in 5 minutes, so don't wait. And her chances of being rescued, the police tell me, are 1 in 100. They make money by selling women over and over and over again. And by the way, they want the little girl because the woman will do anything to protect the little girl. Other questions? And yes?
You talked about the Facebook groups delaying aid. Generally, a lot of people say if the aid had come sooner, Ukraine would be doing better, or that we're sort of letting them hold on. It's our government, though, that's delaying the aid.
Yeah, but here's why. Take Susan Smith. She's all on fire on this issue. Yeah, they're wasting our money. Why can't we keep it here? And that we're propping up somebody who persecutes Christians. I mean, she writes to all her elected representatives. They're all encouraged to do that. So you're an elected representative, and you have this avalanche of people saying, we'll never vote for you again in our lives if you support Ukraine. So there's a political impact from this. I want to make sure, I was kind of hoping somebody would ask me about assassination.
Have you assassinated anybody recently?
I would like to, but I haven't. No, I wish I could assassinate Putin, but that's not on offer. But I will share with you what happened to me. My third time in Ukraine, and I want to make sure we have, let's see, probably 10 minutes left? All right. My third time going to Ukraine, I was told by 3 different very knowledgeable people, including police, don't go back because some of the articles that you've written, the Russians don't like them. And I'm told something, that the articles that I write, and by the way, please come read them. They're on my website, mitziperdue.com. But I try to tell the human interest stories of what people are going through. And I'm told that this is very displeasing to the Russians because you read about, this terror taken or this territory not taken or whatever, that's not as emotional as telling the human interest stories. So I was told that because of the approach that I take, that I was on the Russian murder list. And again, 3 different Institute for the Study of War, Institute for World Politics, and a police friend all said, don't go because you're on the murder list. But I made the assumption that there would be 500,000 people on the murder list, and I would probably be way down at the bottom, that there would be generals and politicians and all sorts who would outrank me. But when I got to Ukraine, the General Nebitov certainly took it seriously. At every moment, I had 4 special forces guards with their AK-47s accompanying me everywhere. And when would go from one place to another, it would be a caravan. It would be a police car ahead, a police car behind, me in the middle in a police car, and very often would be going at 80 miles an hour. They were taking it seriously. Well, during this period, I heard that I would have a chance to interview President Zelensky. And, as a journalist, does it get better than that? No. So they also told me that they wouldn't tell you ahead of time when the interview would take place. So the 6 days that I've been invited by the Kyiv police, we're talking July of last year, I kept waiting, for my phone to ring to hear that I would get the interview. At the end of 6 days, it hadn't come through. Well, normally I would leave and go back and write up my stories, but in this case, I thought, chance to interview Zelensky. I would like to stay at my hotel and just wait for the phone call. I told General Nebitov's representative that. I'd like to stay another couple of days, but I don't need your special forces round-the-clock protection. And the guy said, his name was Pavel. Pavel told me that the general had said that if you stay, even if you stay in your room the whole time, would still need to provide you with round-the-clock protection because they know that you're here and they can get to you in the hotel. And at that point, I didn't want to to drain the resources of a country at war when they're not getting anything out of me. I mean, I think it's worth it for them if I'm writing their stories. But so I said, okay, fine, I'll wait in Warsaw. And so I get on the train, 19-hour trip. I check in at the airport Marriott. I've checked in, and I'm walking towards the elevator, and I see a man and a woman by the elevator. And I'm not a superstitious person, and I'm not all that good at body language, so it's really hard to explain what I'm about to say, but you've heard of the spidey sense, the Spider-Man sense, a little sort of tickling in the back of your neck that says, don't do this. Okay, it was so strong that I couldn't overrule it. I looked at my watch and pretended that I'd forgotten something, and I turned around and left, and fiddled around in the airport stores and so forth for half an hour, came back. They're gone. I get on the elevator, and on the second floor, they get on. And what I'm about to describe right now, I don't have a memory of it, but I've heard that Putin has neutralized more than 100 journalists. In the past, we were a protected class, now we're a target class. And here's how it's normally done. You're alone, there are two people, one will bump up against you or drop a book on your foot or something, and the other, with a very narrow gauge needle, injects you. And I have no memory of that, but I did have an injection mark for a couple of months afterwards. So, all right, I get off on the fourth floor. I make my way to room 407. I get in, and suddenly I'm having trouble breathing. And it rapidly gets worse. It's just the worst wheezing, death rattle level of wheezing. And I'm sitting on the edge of my bed at the hotel, and it's really clear to me that I should roll over in the bed to reach the house phone. And, this is what I should do, pick up the house phone and say, help, can't breathe. I wasn't sure that I could get my breath enough to do that, but I couldn't even get to the phone because I couldn't roll over. And I couldn't do it. But I did have my iPad still on my lap, and I couldn't move my whole body, but I could type on my laptop. I have a Polish professor friend, his name is Marek, and I texted Marek, help, can't breathe, room 407, airport Marriott, and he got it, and if he hadn't gotten it, I don't think I'd be here. He got it, he telephoned the front desk. The front desk, I learned all of this after the fact. The front desk, the clerk looked out the plate glass window and could see that in the driveway of the airport Marriott was the ambulance, the airport ambulance. So when somebody can't breathe, that whatever the ambulance was there for, somebody can't breathe had precedence over it. And it's awfully hard to know how much time elapsed, but here's how it felt. It felt like 3 minutes between my texting Marek and the door bursting open. Somebody from the hotel, opened the door, and two EMTs, emergency medical technicians, jump towards me, and there's no, is your name Mrs. Perdue or anything like that? No. One of them, quickly puts a mask, an oxygen mask over my face, and the other is grabbing my wrist and injecting me with what I think would be an antidote for anaphylactic shock. I think they assumed it was that. It had no effect. And for me, the world's going black. I can still see faces, but the room is going black, and when you're struggling for each breath, not a great feeling. Well, the first injection had no impact. They did it again, no impact. And I can still see their faces at this point, and I can tell that suddenly it's become really serious. And I learned afterwards that they said that this was the closest call they had seen in many days. they rustled in their medical bag and dug out something else, and they're looking so serious now. And there is a guy with an oximeter and listening to my chest. They take out the third injection, and here's again what I didn't know at the time, but that the emergency medical technicians in Warsaw all have atropine, which is the antidote for Novichok. Novichok is a special nerve agent that's its defining feature is that it's untraceable by normal, no hospital. I mean, Fort Meade Hospital or something might have a way of detecting it, but it's absolutely undetectable. That's why it was developed. But all the emergency medical technicians in Warsaw have it because there's a complete war between the drug cartels from Poland and from Russia, and they fight it out, and they poison each other with Novichok. So I was really lucky that they had the antidote, and it worked really rapidly. I mean, again, I can't tell time, but it felt like a minute before I could take a deep breath again. Well, the results of this was I couldn't leave the hotel for about 5 days because I was too sick. I was sleeping 19 hours a day, just out of it. But finally, I was well enough to return home, and I was seen by a doctor who said, you need an x-ray right off, and it turned out that like 1/3 of one lung wasn't working. And I also had trouble chewing. My gums had turned like the highest degree of inflammation you could imagine, and the dentist said, you're in danger of losing all your teeth because when it's that inflamed, they don't hold them in place. But I'll jump ahead to the end. I still have all my teeth. My lung reinflated. I'm doing fine. But that was my sort of close call, and I don't have a great deal of love for Mr. Putin these days. And I know that you all have dinner plans, and I'm not going to keep you. I'm just going to say thank you for being in the audience and hearing my stories. Thank you.